I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of my story and kind of things that I've dealt with, like with doubt and uncertainty and faith and things like that. Because some of you may know that I basically grew up in this church. My dad has been the pastor. He was a pastor like all throughout my childhood here, and so being a pastor's kid, it was a little bit different than like non-pastors' kid lives, because you're surrounded by all these people from the church. Everybody in the church knows you, and you're just in the center of the Christian culture and the church culture, and just everything like that. So it was different to be kind of raised up in that way, and there were a lot of really cool things that kind of came from that. I remember being in church like all the time, like every Wednesday, every Sunday, going to every Sunday school, going to every event like this, all the like youth summer camps and things like that. And I remember just hearing all the Bible stories growing up and all the teachings of like, all the different topics growing up. And I just kind of just went with the flow. I kind of just would hear stuff that people would talk about, and also just kind of repeat those things, and that kind of became part of my faith. It wasn't really something that I kind of came to by myself. It was more of something that, like, I hear my dad talking on Sundays, and I hear what he says, and I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. So then I would say that, if somebody asked me about that kind of thing. And so that was just a lot of a huge like influence on my life, and there were a lot of times where I would hear about Jesus and the Bible and God and all those things, and just everything that you hear about in church. And so it just kind of became like this head knowledge, like just like stuff that you kind of learn in school, and so there was not really, I wouldn't say a true like deep like commitment to Jesus or anything like that. I remember whenever I first got baptized in like the second grade, it just kind of like made sense in my head, like, yeah, like everything that they're telling me it sounds like true. And I saw my older brother get baptized, so I was like, yeah, this is kind of what you do. And especially being a pastor's kid, it was something that just kind of made sense. So that was something that I did, and I was like, and so they kind of asked me like what Jesus meant to me, and what he did on the cross meant for me. And I just kind of like, I knew the right words to say because I had heard it thousands of times, week in and week out, going to church and going to Bible studies and Sunday school and things like that. And it came to a point to where I feel like I knew how to be like a good person and somebody with like good morals. But in my head, I remember looking at other people, especially like going from elementary school to middle school. I felt like a lot of my friends changed, and like, everybody was super nice, at least to me, like in elementary school. And then like as soon as people go to middle school, everybody like became so mean all of a sudden, and people were saying all these dirty jokes and things like that. And because I had been raised up as this like good little Christian kid, that caused me to be kind of like judgmental for other people, but only like in my mind. Like I wouldn't make stank faces at people, or I wouldn't kind of like look down my nose at other people. It was just kind of like an internal thing where like I know I'm really better than them because I know what's right, and I know that what I've learned in church is like true and things like that. And it was really something that no one could really see. But it was basically, if you learn about like the Pharisees or people in the Bible that even would try to crucify Jesus, like those people were super religious people. Those were people that had read the scriptures and studied the Bible, like the Old Testament at the time and everything like that. And I felt like part of me on the inside, and after the fact, like not realizing later, like now I can realize that the judgment that was in my heart at the time was just like the people that had crucified Jesus, and the people that didn't want to believe that Jesus was, the Messiah or God in human form and things like that. And so it wasn't really until like I went to Congreso, which is a youth conference. I don't know if any of you have been there before. It was in Waco, and it was weird because like there's kind of like a structure, going to church. You go in, you walk in, people say hi. There's like a worship service, and you kind of start off with the upbeat songs, and you go to the slow songs, and then I figured out when to raise my hand in worship and when to not raise my hand in worship, and when to look really like spiritual and like I'm really thinking about these things, and like so that other people could see me and see me as like the good Christian kid. And, going to camps like that, I knew like, oh, this is the part where the guy gets really passionate about like what he's speaking about. And then somebody will walk from backstage and go to the keyboard and start, playing the keys. And this is where people start getting really emotional. And this is like, where people will come to the altar and make these huge commitments to Christ and things like that. And all of those things are real, and like people do have like transformational change in their lives because of Christ and things like that. But I kind of figured out the system and like the culture of Christianity, and I was just kind of playing that game. But the crazy thing was that when I went to this camp, it wasn't an altar call. It wasn't like a speaker that was really, had a way of talking that just was really captivating and said something that sounded good. It was not because of like a 3-point sermon that he had that really, stuck in my head or anything like that. It was after he had spoken and he had given the altar call, and people, had big life-changing moments with Christ. And then after, we just started singing like in worship. And so I was just kind of singing, and I was, going along with it. And there was this moment where I felt like God had spoken to me. And I remember growing up in the church and hearing like, what do you mean by like God spoke to you? Like, were you just by yourself outside and like the clouds parted, and then you just heard this deep, dark voice, that said like, Jonathan, you need to do this or whatever, like I didn't really understand like what people meant by like God spoke to me. But I believe that God can speak to you in ways that are relatable to you, because God made you, and he knows like what you're like. He knows like your taste in comedy and like what your personality is like. And I like to think of myself as like an intellectual person, or a person that just thinks a lot about stuff. And it's not all about like really nerdy stuff. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I wonder like who made those lights? Like who like went through their whole life and like ended up with this job and crafted this thing in some factory, and then it ended up here, and then it's like right in front of me on the stage. It's just like random stuff like that. And I like think of dumb stuff like that all the time. But I like to think of myself as like a thoughtful person, And so I knew that God was speaking to me, because I feel like the way that he spoke to me was just through my thoughts. And well, you can say, well, how do you know that just wasn't one of your thoughts, Like, how do you know you're just thinking of some random thing, just like you're thinking about lights or, something like that? And it was because it wasn't something that, like, I looked at and observed and then it just kind of came to me. It was something that just kind of came out of nowhere. Like, I was just singing, singing the songs, and it was a good song and everything. And then there was just a moment where I felt like an overwhelming peace, like just overall in my body. And I felt like God was telling me, because like through my thoughts, that he was telling me, I have a plan for you that's so much greater than you know. And I love you like far greater than you can understand. And that was something that I heard like, a lot in church. But the reason I know that God had like spoken to me in that moment is because it was different. I felt the peace in my heart and my soul, and I was just brought to tears. And I don't really cry super often, but I was just straight up bawling, like tears just rolling down my face, just like ugly crying. And I was just like, God, like for the first time, this makes sense in my heart, and it's not just something that's like in my head anymore. And that was kind of the moment for me that all the times that I heard that Jesus loved me in, Sunday school and Sunday morning and Wednesday night church and things like that, like the Holy Spirit really came to me and made that real to me in my heart. And I was blown away by that. And that's when my faith really became my own. And the reason why I really love that phrase, like my faith became my own, is because it not only just kind of happens to be about like, I feel like a lot of like pastors' kids will say that like my faith became my own because like I grew up in the church and my parents taught me this and my Sunday school teachers taught me this. And it was no longer about the faith that like my parents taught me. It wasn't something that was just handed down to me. It was really my own. It was really my own experience and my own belief that led me to commit to Christ and really give my life to him. And it was no longer, my parents or my church leaders, and it wasn't, anything like that. It was my own experience. And that basically kickstarted my kind of walk with God, or like my relationship, my deep relationship with God. And when my faith became my own, and when that journey began for me in my walk with Christ, it also began a journey of uncertainty. Because, we deal with so many, we deal with so much uncertainty, every single day. I was so certain that my man Patrick Mahomes would win the Super Bowl and that he would, run around and make these crazy plays. And I was so certain that guys that made it to the NFL would be able to catch the ball that Patrick Mahomes would throw to him. But obviously I was wrong. And I was so certain that I would be able to go see one of my favorite bands in concert when I bought the tickets in January of 2020, thinking that I'd be able to see them in October. And it was just there's so much uncertainty because you think what's going to happen. And there's a reasonable amount of faith that we can have. There's not really a lot of certainty if you think about it. We're not even certain that the sun will, rise tomorrow morning. But, we've experienced enough times, the sun has come up every single morning for every day of our lives, So we kind of can have the faith that that the sun is going to rise every morning. And but there's so much uncertainty that we face every day, and really, uncertainty can naturally lead to faith, and it can lead to doubt. Just because you're uncertain, there's so many things that we can be uncertain about, especially as I was kind of going through and making my faith my own. I kind of looked at all the things that I was taught as a kid, and I had to really separate what are the things that I was taught that was just tradition. Is this all, do you always have to raise your hand at this emotional part of the song? Or can you just, be really contemplative, and can you just really sit there and really digest the lyrics and think about, your own relationship with God and what the words of the songs really mean. And then in other contexts, there were times where I would see people jumping around and being really, really energized and excited and passionate about, worshiping God. And so for a lot of people, for some people, that was the way that they were raised, and it was just part of the faith. And so I had to kind of parse things out and figure out, all right, is this do I do this because the Bible tells me to do this, or because, or just because this has been my experience, or just because somebody told me to do this, right? And we face so much uncertainty, and we find ourselves asking a lot of questions, why? Why did God do this? Or why was I created this way? Or why did I pray about this thing for day after day after day and it still didn't happen? Why did my parents have to do this? Or why did my family have to be this way? Or why did this subject have to be the hardest subject for me in school? Or, there's thousands of questions and things that we can be uncertain about. And sometimes, like I said, uncertainty naturally leads to either faith or it can lead to doubt. And just because you're uncertain about things doesn't mean that you can't have faith. And I think that's really shown in the Bible too. So I didn't even bring up my Bible up here. I have it in my notes. But if you guys want to look, and if you have your Bibles, go to Daniel chapter 3. is going to be Daniel chapter 3, verses 15 through 18. So this is basically an example where, these guys faced uncertainty, and there was kind of an opportunity for both like faith and doubt. And so in Daniel chapter 3, 15 through 18, I honestly can't remember which version this is. It's just copied and pasted into my notes. But it's basically, to set up the context for it, this is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Some of you guys know them as Rack, Shack, and Benny, if you were like me growing up, watching VeggieTales, if you guys know what that is. But so they're basically under the rule of this king named King Nebuchadnezzar, right? And King Nebuchadnezzar builds this statue, this giant golden statue, and he gets all these, I think they're called Chaldeans, and those are like the people of like under his rule. And he said, basically, we're going to have like horns, we're going to have lyres, we're going to have flutes, we're going to have like all these instruments. And as soon as like all these instruments go off, then everybody's going to bow down before me, like right in front of, this huge statue. And so then some of the Chaldeans didn't like the Jews, Rack, Shack, and Benny, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they went up to the king and they said, hey, there's these Jews that refuse to bow down to you whenever the music, whenever they blow the horn and they, play the flute or whatever. And he said, you need to confront them. And they bring them together. And of course, the Jews had believed in God, and they believed that that there should be no other idol before God, and that they weren't going to bow down to this king because they were going to, submit to God only, and they weren't going to submit to a king or a statue or anything like that. So if you're in Daniel chapter 3, verse 15 says, now if you're ready, when you hear, this is King Nebuchadnezzar speaking, by the way, talking to the three Jews. Now if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, basically, he's saying, when the beat drops, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? And so what their response says, it says, they replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. And this is an important part. In verse 17, he say, if the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. Verse 18, but even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. And so in this moment, you see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at a kind of a crisis point, because they're refusing to bow down to the king and to the statue. And the consequence of that is being thrown into a furnace of fire. And their response is a response of uncertainty. They literally don't know. They're like, we have faith right now that, God is going to protect us and he's going to save us, but we really don't know. And it says, but even if he doesn't rescue us, we don't know if he doesn't, even if he doesn't do this, we just want you to know that we're not going to do what what you're telling us to do, and we're not going to bow down to you. And it's kind of interesting to think about, faith and doubt, because faith, at the very least, faith can only exist with at least the possibility of doubt. If there was no possibility of doubt, if there was no uncertainty, there would be no reason for faith, And it's literally if we knew everything was going to happen, if we had the knowledge of, what's going to happen every day and what's going to happen to us and the result of, everything that's ever going to happen, then there would be no reason for us to have faith. And God being the all-powerful God that he is, he could have easily just made us, angels or servants or people that literally just bow down to him and just know everything and don't require us to have faith. But he puts uncertainty in our lives because he wants us to have faith. And he wants us to know that even if we don't have the answers to things, that we can trust in the one person who does have the answers, being God. He wants us to know that we can trust in him to be there whenever we have questions, whenever we have doubts, when uncertainty comes and we're like, I'm actually not sure if God is going to pull through here. I'm not sure if his love really, covers, all my mistakes, or I don't know if he's really going to be there for me. When we have those doubts, that is an opportunity for us to get closer to God, because that is just a natural product of uncertainty. And uncertainty is always going to be part of our lives. And when I think of doubt, I always think of Doubting Thomas. You guys know Doubting Thomas? It's so kind of funny because I was like, man, this guy, I think there are like maybe 3 or 4 times in the Bible where they talk about Thomas. And one of them is like before Lazarus died, and another one was basically like Jesus is talking to the disciples, and he says, I'm going to go, to heaven, and I'm going to leave, and you know the way that I'm going. And Thomas says, wait, I want to pull up, I don't have the verse right now, but you can figure out where Thomas says this. Because he's like, wait, we don't know the way that you're going. Like, how are we going to know? He's like, he has this doubt, or he has this ignorance of like, God, you said this, but I don't really know what you mean. Which I feel like I have the same kind of thing too. Like sometimes I read the Bible, or I get in this situation, and I'm like, God, I know you said this, but I don't really understand right now. And Jesus' response is, whenever he asks him, like we don't actually know the way that you're going. Like, how are we going to know? He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through me. And that's the response that Jesus gives to him. And of course, the more famous time that you hear about Thomas is after Jesus had died and he was nailed to the cross, and he was buried in the tomb. He comes back to the disciples, and the disciples are like chilling, having dinner or whatever they were doing, and they're all together in one room except for Thomas. Like, I don't know why, but this one dude was just left out, and everybody else was there. And they're in the room, and the door is locked, and Jesus comes through after he was crucified, and he says, like, look, I'm here, I'm back, I was risen from the dead, and I have, like, oh my gosh, my bad. He's like, Jesus comes through the locked door, comes in, and shows him the holes in his hands and his feet, and he shows them his side, like where he's pierced and everything. And Thomas wasn't there. And so then after Jesus leaves, the disciples end up going to Thomas, and they say, we saw Jesus, and he was like risen from the dead. And I can imagine Thomas being like, the Jesus that was like nailed to the cross? And they're like, yeah. The one that was literally dead and buried and like in a tomb and had the rock covered up and sealed it and had Roman guards outside? You're telling me that he went to you guys in a locked room? And they're like, yeah. And he was like, I don't know about that. Like, can you imagine? Literally the craziest experience, the craziest thing to happen in all of human history happens. And people will tell you like, oh yeah, this like crazy miraculous thing that only could happen, that could only be an act of God, just happened. And he says, I can't really believe it until I see it. And like, this guy's Doubting Thomas. For the rest of human history, he's going to be known as Doubting Thomas. Like, he could have done a lot of more like crazy stuff for God and following Jesus his whole life, but that one moment of doubt, and everybody always knows him as Doubting Thomas. I was like, man, that's tough, because I have so many moments of doubt. And I see like a lot of huge like biblical figures, like of course like Thomas and people like David, where David has all these psalms where it almost seems like he's like struggling back and forth between like, God, I don't know if you're going to show up for me. I don't know if you're really there. I'm like, don't even feel your love or anything. And then like at the end of the chapter, he's like, but I know you're going to be there for me. I have full faith in you, and I'm going to be devoted to you forever. But God, I actually don't know if you're going to pull through here. And so it's like there's so many moments of doubt and then faith and doubt and faith because he's just in such a time of uncertainty. And yet David was called, a man after God's own heart. And there's other people like John the Baptist. He was in jail, and he actually sent people to Jesus and said, hey, Jesus, are you actually the Messiah, or are we supposed to wait for somebody else? Like, John the Baptist, didn't know if Jesus was the Messiah. He literally baptized Jesus and was like, I don't know. I don't actually know if, you're the Messiah. Are we supposed to wait for somebody else to come? And so I've felt like those biblical figures before, all these great people in the Bible that always have doubts. And, I've felt like sometimes, having doubts has felt like it bullies us, like it's an enemy. Especially growing up in church, it seemed like everybody was so sure about everything, and it seems like nowadays everybody is 100% right about this one thing, and they always have to be super outspoken about it because I know I'm right and I know that everybody else is wrong. And there were so many times where I thought to myself, I actually don't know if this is right. When I'm in church or if I'm in Sunday school or something like that, I would hear something and I'd be like, do I really believe that? I don't know if I believe that. And I almost didn't want to say anything. And I just wanted to push all those feelings away, all those moments of doubt, and push them all away because I felt like this is not something that I'm supposed to do. This is not the right way to do things. This is not what Christians are like, and this is not like that. And I've almost felt like having doubts was a sin, because it seemed so far from God that it was going to push me away, and it was going to, I almost felt shame for having thoughts of hey, I actually don't know. But the thing about sin is that sin is, by definition, things that separate us from God. Anything that we do that separates us from God is a sin. But the thing about doubt is that doubt can actually be a catalyst for faith. Doubt can actually be our friend and be something that can bring us closer to God. And kind of over time, I've just, even recently in my life, not just in middle school or high school, I'm just continuing to learn that doubt is not the enemy. And we kind of need to be really intentional, and we need to confront our doubts that we have. And we need to confront even our faith that we have. Because from my personal experience, I felt like my faith growing up was rooted in what other people were telling me. And it wasn't really rooted in my own relationship with Christ. And it wasn't really rooted in what I had studied. And we have to kind of be really intentional about looking, what is the source of our faith? And what is the source of our doubts? Because for me, when my faith was defined by the culture of Christianity, and my faith was defined by pastors and other people and things like that, when those things began to fail, when you hear stories about people in the church who have all these secret sins and things like that, I put so much faith in those people. And when you have faith, when your faith is defined by broken people or broken churches or broken institutions, then your doubt is going to be crippled because of those things as well. And so I felt like a lot of times I was having doubts because of the way that Christians were acting, to be honest. And there's a lot of reasons why. There are a lot of things there's a lot of reasons why, the church does things poorly. And mostly because the church is filled with humans, and humans aren't perfect, And so I'd seen a lot of things to criticize about the church. And that almost led me more to like doubting my faith and like, do I really want to believe like the same things these people believe? And like, do I really want to be a part of this? And what I realized is that the source of my doubt was because of broken people doing, sinful things. And it wasn't really because of something that I had an issue with, with Jesus, or the fact that Jesus died for me, or the teachings of like the fruits of the Spirit, like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Like those were none of those things. I had no doubts about any of those things. I had no issue with any of those things. And so if I want to challenge you to right now define and find the source of your faith and find the source of your doubt. Because your faith needs to be your own. Your faith doesn't need to come from pastors you see on Instagram or, clips you see on Twitter of pastors saying things. And even things you hear on Sunday morning. Like, I'm not saying that those things are wrong. I'm saying that your faith needs to be your own. When you hear people preaching, you need to compare that with the Bible and what God really says. Because people make mistakes. Pastors make mistakes. And sometimes there are things that preachers or pastors or other Christians will say that is contrary to the Bible. And they may not be doing it intentionally, but we need to go back to what God says and really find the source of our faith. Because if the source of our faith is corrupted, then it's just going to lead to more doubt, And so maybe your faith has been defined by your parents, or it's been defined by like your relationship with a church or with your pastor or with your friends or other Christians or just the culture of Christianity. Maybe your faith has been defined by even politicians that tell you this is what you need to believe because you're a Christian or things like that. And I think we need to figure out, why do I believe what I believe? Is it because this is what God really says, or is this just something that I've heard a million times and I just thought of it as true? And so that is something that I think we need to just kind of reflect on and think about throughout this weekend. We're going to talk more about doubt and faith and just think about like how faith and doubt relate to uncertainty. And like you may be uncertain about things, but it doesn't mean that you're losing faith. Just because you don't know if God is going to do like the things you've been praying for, or like the reason of like the source of your doubt is because of the way Christians have treated you. I think we need to dig into that, and we need to be really intentional about confronting that and saying, is the reason why I don't believe in God, or the reason I don't believe in the Bible, is it because of what the Bible says, or is it because of the way other people have treated me, or the way that, pastors have, manipulated their power or something like that, There are a lot of broken parts of the church. But we're all, when you're a part of the church, you're obviously human, and we're broken, and we're still called to love and to be gracious and merciful to people. So I really want you guys to have just kind of an open mind and an open heart going into this weekend, thinking about the source of your faith, thinking about the source of your doubt, and really asking good questions. Like, if you don't understand something, you don't need to just push it away or just like think, okay, well, I'm never going to believe this or anything like that. I think it's good for us to ask questions and ask good questions. And as Christians, we need to talk about a lot of things that people have questions about, because I feel like there are, many topics that maybe we deal with on a day-to-day basis that the church has been silent about. And so there's going to be a time for us to take questions from you guys and really confront them and talk about them. And I just want you guys to have an open heart and an open mind about that. And just know that even if we don't have the answers, we know that God does have the answers. And I'll leave you just kind of this one thing that has really been a huge part of my life. I think about two verses in the Bible, in the New Testament. that have really stuck out to me. Two phrases that I commonly think of is that God's peace or God's love is beyond our knowledge, and his peace is beyond our understanding. And that really struck a chord with me, because when I was back at that youth conference, after the altar call, after the speaker had left the stage, and when we were just, singing, I had this moment where I felt the peace and the love of God that it was beyond my comprehension and beyond my own mind. I just had never experienced anything like that before. And, the Bible says that his thoughts are way above our thoughts, and his ways are above our ways. And so even if we don't know the answers to questions that we have, we know that God does, and we know that we can always find people to talk to about it, and we can always be more intentional about thinking through these things, and just, of course, remember that there are a lot of people in the Bible that are looked up to as heroes now that also had doubts and things like that. But just go into this weekend with an open heart and an open mind, ask good questions, and we'll have a good time as we kick off this weekend. But I just want to pray with you guys. That's just kind of an introduction basically to what we're going to talk about this weekend. And we'll go ahead and pray and we'll move on. But God, we love you, and we know that sometimes life is just full of uncertainties, and we know that we can often have times of faith and times of doubt and times where things just don't make sense and we don't have all the answers. And God, we just want to come to you honestly and just come to you with an open heart and just being sincere. And God, I pray that you would just draw closer to us as we draw close to you, God, and that you would just reveal yourself to us in ways that we haven't seen you before. And God, I pray that we would just have a great time, that we'd have a good time of fellowship, and that we would just learn more about you. And we love you, and we can't wait to get closer to you and grow and learn more about your word and just the character of who you are. Jesus, we love you. And all these things we pray.